So I've talked about how people fought against slavery and how that fighting against slavery helped to undermine the system. There were gigantic revolts throughout the Caribbean, in the Americas, in Africa itself, on the boats and ships. However, once people were enslaved, that didn't stop them. Once they were enslaved, that didn't stop them at all. And I want to tell you the story of a man called Henry Box Brown. And you can read about the story in the exhibition at the Whitworth. Henry Box Brown was a slave in Virginia in America in the 1840s. And at that time, quite often, families were split up. He had a wife and children. And when his children got to the age of 9 or 10, his master sold off both his 2 children and his wife down south at kind of quite extreme, for large profits. And when he'd sold his wife and his children down south, he decided that he was going to try and escape and then make efforts to get his wife and children through. How do you escape slavery? It's an extremely difficult thing to do. You're being worked all the time, and also whenever you're away from your plantation, you have to have a note from your master saying you're allowed to be away from the plantation. Well, Henry Box Brown was in touch with some free blacks in the town of Richmond, and he learnt about a method of escape, a new method of escape they were trialling. And the method of escape involved a packing box. 3 foot by 3.5 foot by 2.5 foot. This packing box is slightly too large. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to put any of you in the box. I'm going to put myself in the box, seeing as I'm the only male here. So what I want to do is I'll get into the box. What happened was, he was in this box for 27 hours. Because he had to be sent to the 3 North, to Philadelphia, by post. He had some air holes in there, and he had a bladder full of water, but that's all he had. He was an average-sized man, exactly my height, in fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in the box, and then I want a volunteer just to close the box.
I'll do that.
You'll do that, you'll enjoy it. Okay. When I'm in the box, I want you to think about the way I've had to put myself into a position in the box in order to, and I want you to think about someone being in that box for 27 hours and how much they must have wanted their freedom and how important their freedom was to them. Okay, so, I don't know if, and in fact, as I say, this box is too big, slightly too big. Can you come and closer in, please? Okay, and then when he got to Philadelphia, he popped out of the box, and he said to the people waiting there, "Good morning, gentlemen," as though he just arrived on the tram or something. And what we need to think about here is that this method of escape was unable to be used thereafter because he made publicity about it. And in fact, many of the abolitionists said that he'd undermined other people's chances of escape. What he did was he took the original box with him and he came to Manchester and he gave talks about slavery and used the box. And one time he did a talk in Leeds and he posted himself from Bradford to Leeds. And he got to Leeds and there was a big band waiting for him playing show tunes, and they put the box onto a horse and carriage and took it through the town, and they opened it at Leeds Town Hall, and he spoke at a meeting of 2,000 people to tell them that they ought to fight against slavery. So when we think about that desire for freedom, that's in a sense what you're all doing in terms of the dancing you're doing, is talking back to that desire for freedom. And so I wanted to share that story. It is, when you think about it, it is quite amusing, this kind of way of escape. But it had to work, and it did work for him. And if he'd have been caught, he'd have been sent back into slavery and actually sent down south into a worse form of slavery. And other slaves who were caught had limbs, if they were older slaves and were actually felt to be useless, they were branded in different ways. They were whipped close to death, etc., etc. And even if they were young slaves, they could be whipped close to death. So a lot of the punishment regimes were just absolutely extreme. So when you think about slavery, don't just think about those punishment regimes, though. Don't just think about the ways in which people were exploited. Think also about that desire for freedom, which was so great that someone would put themselves in a packing box for 27 hours in order to escape.